In 1922, one of the most sensational archaeological discoveries was made when archaeologist Howard Carter opened the tomb of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, aka King Tut. Since then, King Tut has become a household name, and his golden mask is even considered Egypt's most famous artifact of all time. Most of Tut's fame comes from the richness of his tomb. It's the most intact royal tomb found in the Valley of the Kings and perhaps all of Egypt. But artifacts and wall paintings aren't the only treasures. I'm Madam Archaeologist, your go-to informant on everything archaeology, and in this episode, I'll dive into what another treasure from King Tut and his family members' tombs can tell us about the deep origins of this family: ancient DNA. Ancient Egyptian pharaonic history, before the conquest of Alexander the Great, is divided into a series of dynasties, which are then grouped into larger periods depending on Egypt's political stability. King Tut and his family belonged to Dynasty 18, which was part of the New Kingdom. Tut was born around 1341 BC and became pharaoh around the mere age of 9, although he wasn't a particularly important one. He undid his father's religious reforms, a bit on that soon, but his reign didn't even last 10 years and he died around the age of 18. He was buried in the Valley of the Kings, where many New Kingdom royals and nobles were laid to rest. In 2020, a paper was published detailing the results of a second round of DNA tests done on the mummies of Tutankhamun and his family members. Research was done on King Tut himself, his parents, his grandparents, which would have only been 2 individuals since his parents were full siblings, and 2 of his great-grandparents. Tutankhamun's father was Akhenaten, also known as Amenhotep IV, whose reign is known by Egyptologists as the Amarna period. Why does his reign get its own cool name? Well, because he tried to change the course of Egyptian history by promoting the worship of a single sun god called Aten rather than Egypt's traditional gods, he decided to move the capital to a city he had founded called Akhenaten, aka Amarna, and he even changed the style of royal Egyptian art. I find the Amarna style quite interesting because it's much less rigid than traditional Egyptian art, and you see a lot more flow and movement. Discussing Akhenaten's reign merits its own episode in its own right, but it's worth mentioning that his religious reforms made him a very controversial pharaoh, even in his own times, and after he died, people went right back to the old ways of doing things. It was originally thought that Akhenaten was buried in his new capital at Amarna, at least that's where he intended on being buried, but his tomb there was empty. Do not worry though, DNA showed that the mummy found in tomb KV55 in the Valley of the Kings was that of Akhenaten. It's possible that he was originally buried at Amarna and then moved to the Valley of the Kings after construction on his new capital was abandoned, but this is not conclusive. Tut's mother, however, was not Akhenaten's famous wife Queen Nefertiti. We don't know much about her identity beyond the fact that she was her brother's sister, so her mummy is known simply as the Younger Lady. I know this sounds gross, but incestuous marriage was quite common amongst royals in ancient Egypt. King Tut's grandparents were King Amenhotep III and Queen Ti, and Ti's parents were Tuya and Yuya. All were buried in the Valley of the Kings. So, how are researchers able to trace this family's ancient origins? By estimating their haplogroups. I'll tell you what a haplogroup is, but first it'll help to know a bit about DNA more generally. DNA, which is short for deoxyribonucleic acid, is pretty much a code that contains a bunch of information about each and every one of us. We inherit 50% of our nuclear DNA from our father and 50% from our mother, and this nuclear DNA is packed into units called chromosomes, located in the nucleus of a cell, hence the word nuclear DNA. We humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, specifically 22 pairs of autosomes and 1 pair of sex chromosomes. The male sex is determined by the presence of the Y chromosome. Now, regarding the sex chromosomes, children will always inherit an X from their mother, but if the father passes down his Y instead of his X, then his child will be male. That Y chromosome is really important in DNA and family studies because it can be used to trace a male's direct paternal ancestry. This is possible because as the Y chromosome gets passed down from father to son over generations, it accumulates mutations at certain base pair locations called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. A base pair is a location on a chromosome where a nitrogenous base pairs with its opposite. There are 4 nitrogenous bases: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, abbreviated A, T, G, and C. A always pairs with T and G always with C. A SNP is a type of mutation called a substitution that occurs at a single base pair location. At that base pair, a nucleotide has been replaced with another. So, say that base pair location so-and-so originally boasted the nitrogenous base adenine, a mutation may occur which substitutes it for guanine. So, when a man takes a DNA test, geneticists will look for specific SNPs on the Y chromosome and assign him to a haplogroup, for example, R1b1a, C1a2, etc. And everyone with the same Y chromosomal haplogroup will share a common direct paternal ancestor that lived a very long time ago. Only males can find out their Y haplogroup because females don't have a Y chromosome. If you're a woman and you're curious to find out more about your direct paternal ancestry, you would need a brother, your father, or cousins who would share the same direct paternal ancestor to take a DNA test. Now, there's another organelle in our cells that houses a different type of DNA, and it's called the mitochondrion. Both daughters and sons inherit mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA for short, but solely from their mother. I'm not going to get into too many technical details here, but the important thing you need to know is that we can use mtDNA to trace direct maternal ancestry. The principle is the same as Y chromosomal haplogroups in that geneticists look for mutations and assign you to a haplogroup, like H14A or K1b1a1, etc. These mutations took place at specific locations and points in time, so they can be used to trace very ancient ancestry. Without further ado, let's dive into the haplogroups of King Tut and his family members. Tutankhamun and his parents were estimated to carry mtDNA haplogroup K and Y chromosomal haplogroup R1b. K originated in West Asia and is today distributed across the Middle East, the Caucasus, Europe, and North Africa. R1b is predominantly distributed today throughout Europe, especially in the western part, but it's also relatively common in Anatolia, the Caucasus, and parts of Central Africa. Its exact place of origin is unknown, but it was likely somewhere in Eurasia. Amenhotep III was also R1b, of course, but his mitochondrial haplogroup was H2b. The haplogroup H originated most likely in the Middle East, but it evolved largely in Europe and is most prevalent today amongst Europeans, although it is found in the Middle East and North Africa as well. T, Kuya, and Yuya all belong to mtDNA haplogroup K as well, but Yuya's Y chromosomal haplogroup was G2A, which likely originated in the Middle East and is found today mainly in the Caucasus, the Near East, and around the Mediterranean basin. These provide interesting insights into King Tut and his family's ancient origins. None of the estimated haplogroups originated in sub-Saharan Africa. Rather, they mainly originated in Western Asia, supporting deep origins for this family in that region. It is likely that the haplogroups were introduced into Egypt by migrating Near Eastern farmers thousands of years ago. Of course, we don't have the entire genetic story of King Tut's family because haplogroups only give us direct maternal and paternal lines. But it is interesting that all the haplogroups of King Tut's close ancestors originated outside of Africa. I emphasize this because some scholars consider Egypt to be an African civilization. It's important to keep in mind, though, that continental divisions are modern concepts, and if we look at Egypt's geographical location, it's also connected to West Asia. When you say that you're no longer in Africa and have crossed into West Asia, this is based entirely on modern borders. Plus, the ancient Egyptians would not have considered themselves African in the way we use the term today, being grouped with other populations that inhabit the African continent. They were just Egyptians. So whether we should consider Egypt an African civilization boils down to their DNA. Are they genetically similar to, or distinct from, sub-Saharan Africans? Of course, I can't give you an answer by looking at the haplogroups of just a few ancient Egyptians, but DNA studies have also been done on non-royal ancient Egyptians, and the results might shock you. I'll dive into that in an upcoming episode, so stay tuned. That's it for this episode. As usual, if you have any thoughts, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to give this video a like. Subscribe for more cool content by your go-to informant on everything archaeology, Madam Archaeologist.